Hello and welcome. Today we're going to learn about why I almost never shoot HDR or bracketed shots. And so really the main reason that I don't shoot bracketed shots is because of the dynamic range on the Sony camera that I use, the Sony A7, and is so good that I can pull up the shadows and the detail in the shadows, and it has little impact on the noise. It introduces a little bit of noise, but not so much that it's really requires shooting bracketed. So Nikon is also really good at bringing up the shadows and the noise. Canons are a little bit less as good. Their cameras are getting a little better, but they're kind of notorious for not having as good as dynamic range as the Nikon and Sony camera sensors. So I've got some example photos here. So here's 3 photos that I took bracketed. This was taken in the Sawtooth Mountains this last summer, and you can see it goes from the sky exposed properly and the foreground really underexposed to a pretty good even exposure, and then an overexposure to expose for the foreground. So, and I've gone and I've already merged those in Lightroom using Lightroom's photo merge, and this is what I get for my HDR image. And I'm just going to go ahead, and I've already edited these, so I'm just going to go ahead and apply the settings that I've already done, and you'll see I'm going to edit the HDR and the middle exposure to show you what those look like side by side. And I basically just did a copy and paste of the settings. So I'm going to select these two. I'm going to compare them. Just do a side-by-side comparison. So you can see here that they're properly exposed. I've edited it for taste, and I'm just going to zoom in and look at some of these areas to show you, some of the detail that you get. So this one on the left is the single exposure. The one on the right is the HDR exposure. And that's just taking a second to load. And I'm zoomed in at 200%. Let me zoom in at 100% here, 1:1. Might be a little quicker. So you can see there's a little bit of noise in the water here. This is the really extreme dark parts of the exposure. Just a little bit of noise. It's not too much. I have applied some noise reduction in my Lightroom, my settings here, so it is reducing that a little bit. But if you come over to the HDR, you look kind of in here, it's a little bit less noise than right in here, but for me, not enough to really warrant shooting bracketed shots. So another one, example here is on this tree. This one almost looks a little bit better on the tree. They're a little bit brighter. So that's one of the main reasons I don't shoot HDR or bracketed, is because I can just pull up the shadows and increase the exposure a little bit and take the highlights down, because Sony has that dynamic range, has that flexibility of doing that. There are certain instances where bracketed shots are required. If you're shooting in an extremely dark or backlit condition, real estate is one area where bracketed shots are pretty much necessary if you want to expose for the the windows properly. So let me just do a quick rundown of the settings that I did on this single shot here to show you what some of the settings that I do. So of course I adjust my white balance, and then I bring the exposure up a little bit, add a little bit of contrast. That just keeps the keeps some of the shadows and darks dark and that, so it's not completely flat. And then I bring my highlights way down and shadows up and blacks down a little bit too, just to, like I said, again, to keep some of that contrast in the scene, so it's not overly kind of blown out, and there still is some range of the tone curve. So, and I usually just do a medium contrast on the tone curve. And I do have a couple of graduated brushes. I've got one for the sky, and of course I'm using the new range mask to just affect the sky, and I have just bring the highlights down a little bit more. I'm not sure I have the clarity on. I'd probably bump up the saturation just a little bit to keep some of that blue in the sky. And then under the color, I really don't mess around with these a whole lot. I may end up doing it before I finish this up, maybe down the blues a little bit. See, that adds a little bit more blue in the sky. I'm not going to mess with really much of the other colors in here. Camera calibration, I will bump up the this just a little bit. I found this is a good way to kind of boost some of the colors in the scene. You see, usually I go +10, +15 in each one of these, just to add a little bit more punch. I prefer to use this over the contrast, or the saturation, I mean, just because it doesn't punch as much saturation into it. It doesn't look oversaturated when you do it that way. And really, that's the main settings that I do to edit a single exposure. And again, I'll show you the side-by-side here. So there's really, to me, there's really not a lot of benefit to shooting HDR for a scene like this, or editing in HDR. You know, one, it's you now have 3 shots plus the file, so you really have 4 photos for one image. To me, it's 4 times the photos, 4 times the space. Yeah, hard drive space is cheap nowadays, but if I can get it in one shot, I'll do it in one shot. So again, that's one of the big reasons I've made this switch over to Sony. But Nikon does just as good in bringing up the shadows. Canon's getting a little better. They've really not keeping up though with the Sony and Nikon as far as dynamic range, and I don't think that's a secret to anybody. So yeah, that's what I have. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching, and if you like what I'm posting, go ahead and subscribe to the channel.